Folks, this is House Corrections and Institutions. It's Tuesday, April 8th, and we are back. We're gonna just go over as a committee, we're just gonna go over the report of Vermont State Building naming. Last year in the Capitol bill, we did put some language in to have a committee. And they did list in their report who was on the committee. There was historic preservation, there was ACCD, there was Commissioner of BGS, a librarian, executive director of the State Racial Equity Office, Agency of Transportation, executive director of the League, and the Historical Society. We spent a lot of time last session really trying to figure out naming of state buildings, what should be a process. There is a process for roads and bridges. Is that Connor's bill? Yes, and there is a naming state buildings. And there is a process for naming geographical areas. So we put in our capital bill, the makeup of this temporary committee to look at other possibilities in terms of how we should go about naming state buildings that are under the jurisdiction of BGS. Seeing that there's already a process where the Transportation Board does roads and bridges, and the Department of State Libraries does geographic areas. No one wants to take responsibility of naming of state-owned buildings that are under BGS. The goal of this group was to come back with some recommendations in terms of how you could move forward and what the process might be. Who makes these decisions? What entity or entities would do this? So I thought it might just be good to quickly go over the report. They did meet. I'm not sure how many times that they met. And I think in the time frame where they met, I think that's when there was a change of commissioners at BGS. And I don't know if that changed anything or not. I know I see the deputy commissioner as Emily, and I don't think she was there when it first started. So that changed. But basically their recommendation was, I quickly read this while we were on the floor, that there really does need to be a process in place. And before that process gets put in place, there should be a pause on naming state buildings. That's basically what the report says. So I don't know if anyone wants to weigh in on this, has questions about it.
Opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I read through this on a cursory basis. It looks like there's a price tag attached to this thing of, you can't quite tell, but a couple $100,000 anyway for this committee to exist.
For a committee, we don't know what it would be the makeup, because it wouldn't be this group.
Well, I understand that, but just the idea of spending a couple $100,000 of state money when we can't fund things that I consider needs and not wants, I don't find particularly tasteful. A committee that strictly, the only reason it exists is to name buildings.
Well, we don't know because we don't have an entity that we could look to that maybe already is in existence. Because when they did the roads and bridges to depoliticize, because the issue is when you get to naming things, it's very political. And in the transportation world, it was like the transportation committee says, hey, we're not going to deal with this anymore. And they gave it to the transportation board, which is already in existence. So they were already there in existence. In terms of the geographical areas, the Department of State Libraries, they do that. They're already in existence. So they already have budgets. So this is anticipating you set up a commission or committee. We don't have to do that.
And then secondly, there's some language in here, and I think the references to Dorothy Canfield Fisher, but it's not even the name I prefer. But the point, I don't find it appropriate take somebody out of their time period and put them in a moral context of today. It doesn't work. And if we were to use that as a measure, you would yank almost every historical figure you could think of who, operated any time before 1990.
Well,
And us, as a group sitting here talking about it, will be measured by somebody else's yardstick, well, it'll probably be a meter stick by then, 50 years from now.
well, we are experiencing something right now where there was a 108 Cherry was named after a former commissioner at BGS, and the building is now being sold, and the family is quite upset that they want something else to be named after this person, or they don't want to lose the name on the building. So there's no process in terms of, we've already named a building or an entity, and then something happens to that entity. So with 108 Cherry, it could be torn down. And then what happens with the name? And then the family is really concerned. So I see it from that perspective, not from what was phrased here.
Which is a great argument not to name any buildings after anybody. But it's, but anyway, I don't want to monopolize the floor. I know James has his hand up.
You still part of my thunder. I would be strongly in favor of the idea that you shouldn't, and I felt this way before I was ever here. Like every building in West Virginia is named after proper, doesn't matter who it is, but every building, like it's a big thing. We don't have that many in the state of Vermont named after people, but I have a real problem in general naming things about a specific person as if that person is better than anybody else. And most of us, like whenever I get thanked for military service, I always remind people that I paid and I did it by choice. Same as servants. You went into a different job, you became the governor, everything else. You did it by choice. You got paid. You're not a god. You're not the king or the queen. You are just a normal, an American, or a Vermont. So the idea that we put names on things, and by the way, so a lot of people serve. A lot of people serve. So why do we have a situation where one person served and we're going to be like, this person is above everybody else who served and we're going to name the building after them versus everybody else who served, and it is a very inequitable, but it just seems, I realize America does it all the time, but it just seems very anti-American based on the way we separated ourselves from, the crown. But yeah, anyway, that's my biggest thing. I just don't think anything should be named after, or, if you named, a region after a bird or a mountain range, whatever it is, or if you named a highway after, again, some kind of like geographical event, that's one thing. But to name things after a person is saying, out of the hundreds or even thousands of other people that serve, this person is way above. And we're not talking about like being in a battle and you win the Medal of Honor because you did something that everybody else did. And nobody that served is that much better than the other people. There's no legislator in the state of Vermont that's that much above, for example, any of the rest of us. There's no governor that stands that much higher than everybody else. But how do you choose that person to be, this is the governor whose name we're going to put on it and the other X number? No, it doesn't make any sense to me. So.
Troy?
To that point, the report also encourages us to maybe possibly consider denaming buildings.
Yeah.
Bottom of page 5 under page 6. I don't know if there's any energy around that, but
What did you say?
the report also encourages us to dename.
Oh, yeah.
Name.
Yeah.
And I commented on that briefly. I'm just not, that harkens back to taking people and putting them from a previous time and putting them in today's, moral construct. And I just don't think it's right.
What, denaming?
You could take with the exception of John Adams, the first 6 presidents were slaveholders. So you can take George Washington off the $1 bill. But the conversations would be endless.
Folks. One thing that they did recommend is that there needs to be established some clear guidance and objective eligibility criteria in order to ensure consistency, transparency, and public trust in the naming process. Because right now, there's not much public trust because it's done politically in this building, period. That's how it's done. Courthouses are usually named after judges. And then what usually happens, like when the Waterbury complex was being built, there was a senator who also served in the House, and prior to that was also a lobbyist. And she passed away, and her husband was appointed, and he wanted to name the complex after her. So it's those emotional times when people really want a building named after someone, and it's really, you gotta work it through the politics in the building.
When you think about the judge, so you say courthouse named after a judge, all the judges we've had, that one specific judge stands head and shoulders above every other judge. I got a problem with that. I doubt that's true. But because of the emotional side, we're like, well, this small group of people, and it is a small group of people, we think this person's, so great. Well, everybody else is great too. They all served, they did their duty. Anyways.
Yeah, I like the idea of just not naming buildings after.
Yep. Sorry, Connor.
Oh, no, you're good.
Go ahead, Connor.
Yeah, and I can't disagree with anything said as the cost is a non-starter. To me, I don't think we could justify doing anything like that. And I totally see what the vice chair is saying. But my only hesitation is we're fighting human nature to some extent, right? There will be people in these seats after us. There will be elected officials who die that they hold on pedestals, and they will name things after people if you leave it in just the legislative process without any guardrails to it, to create a thoughtful process to make sure it's done with community input and go through it. So by doing nothing, you do just acknowledge this is going to be the Wild West going forward here, and whoever's sitting in this seat can introduce a bill,
Oh, you do you?
There might be somebody who does it,
Yeah.
I wouldn't blame a person for doing that.
I would say we don't.
If you hadn't tried to name that portalet after yourself, it might have gone.
But what I would say is it's not that we shouldn't do anything. We should make it a statute that you don't name state buildings after people.
That's just a notwithstanding away. It's,
But your rules can be changed too. They can.
Yeah, it's harder to undo a process than just a little line in statute, though, I
I know a
think.
guy that knows a guy.
What?
I know a guy that knows a guy.
Those issues aside, if there's expense involved, I agree with Connie. And vis-a-vis possibly creating another committee, to Alice's point, that might be an existing committee that does this work.
I agree, we should possibly have some guardrails around this too. So it's just not an open, because I think it'll divert right back to what we went through last year.
We went through, it was pretty tough. Spent a lot of time in this committee on one little building.
Thank you, Connor. Yeah, thank you, Connor.
I think Chip was the lead on that one.
No, I'm not so sure.
I mean, I don't know, I see the value in doing that, but I've only been thinking about this 5 or 10 minutes, but I can't think of a single criterion that isn't totally weasel words.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Weasel words, yeah.
Can't wait for you guys to be in the throes of somebody wanting to name a building after somebody.
I think
I get one.
I think we're all
in this
miserable people. We
building.
can say no.
Well, I can assure you, I'll be very consistent.
It does happen. Go from no to hell no.
Well, it still can happen.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
What did you say?
it's all political.
No, but what did you say?
I don't know. You
My
remember?
thoughts. No, but that might.
I don't know if I dare. Yeah, I don't think so. No, there is no process, and it just, I remember a situation where, the Capitol bill was in the process of finishing up between the House and Senate. We were close to an agreement. And it was like a day or so before we adjourned, and there was a situation that there was a lawyer down around Brattleboro who was passing away. And all of a sudden, that morning, I had a former member from that area who all of a sudden was in the hallway and came up to me and wanted to name the courthouse in Brattleboro after this lawyer because he was well respected in the community. It would be really nice to do this immediately in the capital bill because the person was going to be passing away in a few days, and it would be good for him to know this. And then at the time, there was the commissioner from BGS, was Obie, who was very close to this other person. He came up to me and said, we really need to do this right now. It's like, wait a minute here, blah, blah, blah. You can't just go willy-nilly naming a courthouse after a lawyer. We should do it after judges. Well, he's well respected in the community, and on and on and on. And then the speaker at the time came to me, and he was a lawyer, and he knew this lawyer, and he says, don't you dare name any building after him. He's a sleazebag. So
There you go.
so there you go, and it was like, pew, you're getting bombarded on both sides.
Well, there's your criterion. You have to say, yes, you can have this, but your mortal enemy gets a building slightly better name.
Yeah.
There are a lot of people that argue that Sid Allen is a claim jumper, right? Because among other things, he probably was.
So anyway, the building did not get named, but that's what happens. There's high emotions. There's high emotions at a certain time.
There she is. Yes.
Yeah, just say no, And then
No to the restroom.
say
Did you see it?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Send it up, send it up to me.
So, can we put some language to take AI away from Troy?
He's really good at it.
It's pretty good. The,
Can't get rid of it.
the one of me on a horse with Putin, I didn't appreciate so much.
Nice.
The tiger.
Did you see it, Mary?
Yes, I like that. It almost looks like a mausoleum.
It does.
He wanted me to put it in there. I couldn't.
It's very good.
I mean, we could do some work at some point about trying to put in place some guidelines, clear guidance, criteria that would need to be met, that the legislature would have to look at. Or we can just let it lie and
That's the one above it.
see what bill pops up to name a building. The big push that had been happening for about 5 years, 4 or 5 years, was to name 133 State Street after Governor House.
Oh.
That was the big push.
Hmm.
And there was a lot of pressure
Back up.
applied to a lot of people.
Mhm.
There was a lot of pressure applied to a lot of people.
I mean, maybe if you say they have to have been stiff for a long number of years.
Well, what the Department of Libraries, as well as the Transportation Board, they have a real public process. The person needs to have been passed away for 5 years. There needs to be a real nexus to whatever is being named with that person. There has to be a petition that is filed with either the Department of Libraries or the Board of Transportation. And they review the petition and they bring folks in to testify. So there's a real process to it. And you have to really prove that there's a nexus there. And the Board of Transportation, when they testified here, they said you also have to make sure that you have something that you can hang your hat on when you say no to naming a road or a bridge. You're going to have something that you can really validate as to why you're not going forward with it. And I think it was the Department of Libraries for geographic areas said you really need a process for renaming a building, or because they do with geographic areas, because things change. So they have a process in place. So that's what you would look at if you do criteria and guidelines for that. So those are the conversations that occurred in here last year. And the big issue with naming 133 State Street, there's not one building in the Capitol complex that is named.
Right.
And once you start naming a building, this is such a political arena, the Capitol complex, who's to say who would be on 120 State Street? Or who's going to be on the Secretary of State's office? Who's going to be on the auditor's building? Well, that's gone now. Or the agriculture building,
Yep.
or the pavilion.
Yep.
I mean, it's just going to open up this.
Maybe there could be some sort of partisan Olympics and the winners for certain things that, you'd have your choices.
But not, I mean, my vote would always be to say no. That's just because I don't
That's easier,
I don't
yes.
believe in it. But if there was, you had criteria 5 years is nothing. That still connects people to way too personally. But also I think it would, for me to ever be supportive of a process that other than just no, it would be that it goes before multiple different entities rather than one, because one is much more susceptible to the emotion, even if it's, I'm on a board and there's, 7 different people, or 12 different people. You, having been on plenty of different commissions, you all do start thinking a little bit alike at certain things. But if you have multiple different entities looking at it and it goes through an entire process, like my first vote, my second vote, my third vote, my last vote would still be no, but don't do it. But
And we don't have to do anything if we don't want to. I just wanted to make sure that the committee was aware of some of the work that we did last year, and there was a report that came back. Just put it on the table.
Yeah.
For that.
I mean, I would say I'm okay. The rest of the session, we don't have much time, but we got some pretty big fish to fry here, So I don't want to detract from that.
why is it a fish?
I'm a pescatarian. But like, it is in the back of my mind that we had some pretty heavy hitters leave us recently from this building. And I would be very surprised if we don't have more people coming in soon to main buildings.
Oh, I see what you mean, like.
You know what I mean? Yeah.
Right, that-
Oh, yeah, yeah.
That was why I said I agreed that you didn't have some kind of basic to wrap around this issue, because otherwise we are gonna have another flood.
That was percolating at the end of last session with one building already.
Well, that's what the vice chair said.
It's not
5
coming
years
from
is-
the legislative.
5 years is nothing.
Yeah, it needs to be like a generation. And then to Joe's point, I mean, maybe you run it through the whole legislature and say it has to get however many votes means it's got to be bipartisan. Quadripartisan,
We
whatever.
were trying for state buildings because geographic areas and roads and bridges are not in the legislative arena.
Yep.
And we were trying for state buildings are under the jurisdiction of BGS to take it, not have it under the General Assembly. But there's another entity somehow, somewhere, and these are the guidelines and the structure. And if anyone's interested in naming a building that's under state buildings, BGS, then they have to get a petition. There has to be a nexus for that person to that building or that area and present it to that entity, whatever that entity is. And that there's a public process. And then you take the politics of this building out of it.
Right,
You always end up with individuals who are overrepresented. Like in another world I sit in, George Standard, God bless him, the Civil War Brigadier General, has anywhere George Standard ever had a beer and went to the bathroom has a roadside historic marker. So there's one in Burlington. There's another one in Milton where he has a left-handed barn because he had one arm at the time. And then there's another marker on Route 7 in Georgia. So I'm like, look, I know that George Standard is part of our history, but if I see any other George Standard anything, it's just no. I mean, come on. The guy's got more stuff than Adam will do. It's just, it's out of it's out of scale.
It's a good
There
point.
are others like that. George Aiken doesn't have buildings named for him all over the place.
Got
There are others with similar gravitas who do.
Aiken Ave and Davis Ave. George Aiken Ave and Dean Davis. Ave.
Yes, those are roads.
And we
But they're-
tried to get Baldwin after Hoff.
But the other,
Family.
the other senator with a similar tenure to Governor Aiken has many buildings that are his name. So
If we're gonna name it after Governor Douglas, maybe we can make an exception, but I'm just kidding, guys, just kidding.
That's how it starts though. You know, well,
Exactly how it
It's no, or there has to be a
That's
process.
the point. That's exactly my point.
And that's why we were looking at a process that had some structure to it.
Yeah.
And that was fair, and everybody knew what the process was, and it wasn't coming to your favorite legislator and asking to put it in, and depending who's in power and who's sitting where, would have the control.
Still a hyper political process.
Frankly, I don't think it becomes any less political. You're just kind of washing your hands of it. It's still political.
It's very political.
It's just, you
It's a
just.
different arena.
Yeah. Anyways,
So the last thing that was named was the courthouse in Rutland after Judge McCaffrey. The courthouse in Addison is named after Judge Mahady. And then we also have the Costello Courthouse, and that's at 32 Cherry.
Yeah. You know, Shangri-La in Franklin County, but that's a county-owned property.
It's county owned. So what's the committee wish to do? Okay. Keep it quiet, not do much, or
Maybe not this year, maybe
next year?
a little bit next
Yeah.
year if we have some time, just to kind of review it.
yeah,
We kind of,
I like honestly, we get a lot of big,
Yeah,
I
but
don't know if it's fish that we're frying, but we got stuff to do.
Couple eggs.
and then we don't have anything right for the rest of the afternoon.
Do you think, Mary, are you saying, suggesting that because it will take a lot of time to try to put some parameters on this?
Not necessarily, but I think for you folks to have an understanding of kind of, and not that I'm saying you won't understand it quickly, but I think just to do the right kind of balance with it, just have parameters. This is what you would do or not do. We could even say, there's not going to be a process because we're not going to name them, or however, whichever road we go down. But again, you're going to have people that will come and continue to come in years out. So I think it would be in our best interest to have some parameters around it.
Yeah, I agree.
That's just my humble.
It doesn't really just come down to a popularity contest.
Well, that's what we're
That's
trying to
exactly what
work,
it
that's
is.
what we're trying to put in guidelines.
No matter what your guidelines are, it's still gonna be a
Exactly
popularity.
right. It's exactly
But
right.
if you have the public having to submit a petition, and then there has to be a next, right now, there's none of that.
No, I understand, but it's still just a popularity contest and
Well, we could probably even put where, like in the state complex, nothing can be. I mean, you can have specifics like that. If you want no buildings in the complex to be named, then we state it there. Or however far we want, but, you know, I think some gentle parameters without is probably, but that's,
I'm not against it. I'm just saying, no matter what we do, it's just gonna come down to popularity.
Yes, or somebody else, you know, so.
Unless somebody wants to pay for it. Now, if you wanna put a memorial up for yourself, like you do for your, in the
Right,
cemetery,
monument.
Like the walk,
and you pay for it, and there's my memorial.
Like the Walk of Fame?
That's different, but
The Morrissey Bennington Battle Monument?
there you go.
Somewhere, somebody will be arguing Bob Stafford versus Jim Jeffords or Madeline Cunin versus Esther Sorrell or.
Right.
It doesn't end.
I know.
Be careful about saying that.
Okay, well, we beat this one.
Mhm.
So, we're kind of done for today. We don't have anything else scheduled, but tomorrow we have a full morning and we're back on H32 tomorrow. And if we really want to get H32 out as a committee, then we really need to buckle down and start working on it.
Which bill?
That's the
WD and
Oh, I'm
MOUD.
sorry, 232.
No, H32.
For-
We've got the executive director of the Vermont Board of Medical Practice, and then we have the executive director of the Board of Nursing.
Mhm.
Has Tony Fallon been made aware?
Yes, and he can't take it.
Yeah.
Also, Katie McFlynn.
They're about to break up.
Is DLC
yes,
aware of this?
No.
So let's make them aware. So we really have to start working. If we're gonna get that bill out, we have to start working on it.
Yep.
And then we've got some walkthrough of some other bills up there, 294, 349, and 379. But that's not until Thursday.
And what time are we doing? Are we doing courthouse stuff tomorrow?
9 o'clock.
9.
79, that's right.
Oh, I will be
That's-
there.
Yeah, ownership and responsibility.
I don't know what it says.
Second, who's testifying on that? Is that?
Association of County Judges. Side
As a
judges.
mandatory.
So right now, well, I mean,
That discussion went wild because I had two of our side judges approach me this weekend
Oh,
about it. I said, and just dunk it, all upset. We were just talking about whether state or county has jurisdiction in certain areas.
and they want to keep it county.
They didn't really say, but they had said they do everything in accordance. Ours is really very good the way it's done. And they've paid for a lot of what had to be done, not going to the state. So
Yeah.
he said, that was, it was funny because they were, so you were talking about, and I said, yes, we were.
But that just shows what's happening. They've played by the rules. They haven't done anything. And then you've got other counties that, depending what it is, have come here.
And they kind of had a sense of that as well. They said we have a, where we have like an escrow for future improvements to things so that we're maintaining properly and doing the funding sources to have it so we can do it. So, it was, interesting. I already knew they were doing it, but it's a new person that's doing, a couple of new people involved. So it was great that they're still following the practice to the letter.
That is good. So I don't know where it's gonna go on this yet. We do anything or not, we'll just leave the status quo. What I was picking up from the committee last week was keep the status quo, is what I was picking up. I'm still trying to find that bill that we did. It was back in 2008. I think the number was 524. But we don't have access to get further into the system beyond 2010. And I'm trying to find what the bill said.
Judge counsel pull it.
Oh, we've tried. He's busy. He's busy. I haven't heard anything if he's been able to find it or not. For that. So we're done for the day. Sorry, it's so early. unless we can think of something to do.
It's very hurtful.
Our little
I'm sure everybody's offended.
Our little committee's going to meet.
I'll,
We've got a meeting.
Good.